For decades, the Soviet Union accumulated one of the largest diamond reserves in the world. But how exactly did the USSR end up with so many jewels, and why did they hide it all? The answer lies in mining, closed procurement schemes, and the state policy of total control. The main source of diamonds was Yakutia. It was there, in the cold and inaccessible land, that the real treasures, giant diamond deposits, were found. Up to 90% of all Soviet diamonds came from there. But, interestingly enough, even the republics within the Soviet Union were not disclosed the real volumes of production. Everything was kept under the cover of top secret. No figures, no reserves, only reports for a narrow circle of people in Moscow. However, Yakut diamonds alone were not enough. The USSR was actively buying stones abroad. The Soviet Union used diamonds not only as jewelry, but also as a strategic resource. In case of an economic crisis, war, or collapse of the ruble, diamonds could be quickly exchanged for currency, weapons, or food. This was a kind of unofficial safety margin of the system. In the 1970s, it was reported through closed channels that the diamond reserve of the USSR was worth more than the country's gold reserve. But it was not enough just to mine or buy diamonds. They had to be safely hidden and protected as the most important treasure of the country. After all, it was not just a storehouse of jewelry, it was the financial safety cushion of the entire empire. Officially, diamonds were under the control of Gokran, the state depository of precious metals and stones. This agency had existed since Tsarist times, but under the Soviet regime it became even more classified. Only a few people had access to information about the contents. Even ministers did not always know the exact volumes. One of the largest diamond reserves of the USSR was located not on the surface but deep underground, in underground bunkers near Moscow. These facilities were not plotted on any open maps. In fact, they were secret multi-level complexes with concrete walls, massive doors, and a security system comparable to a military base. In the event of war or a nuclear strike, they were meant to withstand. The vaults were under the jurisdiction of several structures at once: Gokran, the Ministry of Finance, and partially the KGB. Each access to the boxes was recorded, the records were kept manually and destroyed immediately after reconciliation. The Soviet Union used diamonds not only as a stockpile for a rainy day, but also as a powerful tool of influence. Diamonds, of which there were more in the USSR than officially published, often became a weapon of covert diplomacy. Money is easy to trace. Diamonds were not. They could be transported without documents, exchanged without trace, stored for decades. Therefore, precious stones became a universal way to solve issues in the international arena. Such schemes were especially active in the 1970s and 80s. At that time, the USSR sought to strengthen its influence in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and often did it not through official deals, but through bloodless gifts. In Europe, too, covert methods were used. Diamonds were also favorable because they did not depreciate like currency. Even in conditions of sanctions and trade restrictions, the USSR could use them as a universal resource of influence. No banks, no traces. According to investigative journalism, only in 1984, the USSR gave about 25,000 carats of diamonds to allied African regimes to guarantee their loyalty in international negotiations. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union began to burst at the seams. The economy was collapsing, the government was weakening, and control over state reserves was gradually being lost. And it was at this point that the most mysterious disappearance of valuables in the country's history began. Diamonds started disappearing from the vaults. A lot of them. Silently. Without a trace. While people's attention was focused on rallies, elections, and the struggle for power, more than 200,000 carats of diamonds disappeared from the Goskrana, the main repository of precious stones. This happened in 1991, just months before the official collapse of the USSR. The disappearance was recorded, but no one was punished. There was no investigation. The materials were either destroyed or are still classified. Documents were drawn up retroactively. Keys were given to temporarily admitted persons, and the cells themselves were opened at night. All this took place under the guise of departmental reorganization or property census. In fact, there was chaos, which was taken advantage of by those who knew where and what lay. In December 1991, when the Union had already virtually collapsed, several aircraft with diplomatic status flew from Moscow to London and Geneva. No one had the right to inspect such flights. There could have been documents, safes, boxes on board. No one ever found out what they were carrying. But later, in the same cities, private firms and foundations linked to former officials and people from the special services began to open. The old rules no longer worked. In the new reality, everyone saved themselves. Some took money, some took gold, and some took stones, which are easy to sell, difficult to trace, and impossible to return. Experts estimate that the missing 200,000 carats could have been worth up to $1.5 billion at the time, and to this day, they have not been found. When the Soviet Union was falling apart, the disappearance of diamonds was no accident. It was not just a simple theft, but a well-organized operation. Behind it were people with clearance, connections, and precise knowledge of where the stockpiles were kept. First of all, these were high-level officials who had access to Gokran and other storage facilities. Some of them already in the early 90s found themselves abroad, where they became owners of elite jewelry companies in just a couple of years. The names of intermediaries, lawyers, diplomats, businessmen who helped to formalize deals, export stones under the guise of personal property, and send them through the diplomatic pouch are also mentioned. One stone the size of a fingernail could be worth tens of thousands of dollars. It was easy to transport them, especially when there were almost no controlling authorities left. Most importantly, none of these people were ever punished. Investigative cases were either frozen or disappeared. In 1994, Western analysts revealed that more than 20 tons of gems of unknown origin had entered auctions through private firms registered by former Soviet citizens. In the 90s, the number of undocumented diamonds increased sharply in the markets of Western Europe and Asia. Their origin could not be precisely established, but experts concluded from the characteristics and cut that the stones were Soviet. Some lots had exact matches with Gokran catalogs, which somehow got abroad. In 2000, one of the largest lots of diamonds in their history appeared at the famous Sotheby's auction. Later, it turned out, these stones are very similar to a batch that disappeared from the USSR in the early 90s. But no one could prove ownership, no documents, no statements, no lawsuits. Everything was done through shell companies registered offshore. Meanwhile, in Russia itself in the 90s, diamonds became currency for the criminal world. They did not need to be declared. They were easily transported and could be used to buy anything: weapons, cars, even property abroad. Many diamonds ended up in private hands. They were sold through jewelry salons, inherited and resold at private exhibitions. After the collapse of the USSR and the wave of export of diamonds, many people started looking for traces of the disappeared diamonds. And it turned out that the main traces lead abroad, to London and Dubai. It was there, according to journalists and experts, that the most valuable batches of stones that used to belong to the Soviet Union turned up. London has long been considered the world capital of the jewelry business. In the 2000s, local jewelry houses began buying up large diamonds en masse, which did not have official certificates of origin. Despite this, experts immediately drew attention to the fact that the characteristics of the stones coincided with the disappeared batches from the USSR. The same size, cut, even the type of inclusions inside the stones, everything pointed to Soviet sources. But since the documents were lost, it was impossible to prove anything. Dubai raises no less questions. This city has become a new center for storing the wealth of former officials and middlemen. It was in one of the banks in Dubai that a collection of Soviet diamonds was found in a private box, which experts recognized by its unique cut style. But as soon as the audit began, the owner of the safe deposit box disappeared and the investigation was quickly scrapped. Through jewelry exhibitions, closed auctions, and private transactions, the stones continued to change owners. Some lots ended up in private collections, others were resold again and again, with new documents issued through offshore companies. Today, it is almost impossible to trace the entire path of these stones, but almost all traces lead to those who were connected with Soviet structures and managed to transfer assets abroad at the right moment.